Hi, I'm Christian Cameron from Hopologia, and I'm going to talk to you today about Fiore and the cavazione. So I'm going to start about my sources. I'm a Fiorist, and I pretty much limit myself, except for my experiments with Marazzo, to Fiore. And when I talk about Fiore today, I'm going to be talking about the Getty manuscript from this particular publication, which you can get from Freelance Academy Press. And mostly I'm going to be talking about information that you can find on page 275, because mostly I'm going to be talking about a play that most of us call Punta Falsa. I'll be referencing the guards, Posta Lunga and Posta Breve, both of which have little descriptions of being deceptive. And I recommend you take a look at all of those. So I want to start with what a cavazione is and when we use it. And then I'm going to talk about things you can do in your apartment during COVID-19 to train to have a better cavazione. So I'm going to start with just making sure we all agree what it is. A cavazione is, I hope you can see this wooden blade I've prepared. By the way, I'm talking to you alone in the nave of a church. This is not my saal. I wish it was. It's very nice, and I wish I got to fence here all the time. Anyway, I have just rigged up some lumber so that I have a piece of wood that sticks out. And it could be stuck at different angles, and ideally, because your opponent often holds their sword at all kinds of different angles or doesn't offer you your sword, and we'll talk about that, you want to practice against all those angles. But let's just do the straight on to begin with. At its basis, a cavazione is changing sides from one side of your opponent's blade to the other side of the opponent's blade. There it is. It looked really simple. Fastest video you've ever seen. The problem with the cavazione, first of all, is that it is never expressly described by Fiore. And second of all, that it has in it some inherent problems as well as some brilliant adjustments. So if you can pass deep into your opponent's zone and then change sides of his blade, the chances that he will parry you correctly are very slim. But with a two-handed sword, not say a rapier or a French foil, that can leave you extremely vulnerable. And I would like you to just watch the following. I'm going to do this with my sword in one hand. I penetrate deeply at the cross, drop my point, come up on the other side. Anybody see a problem with this resolution? I have completely deceived my opponent's blade. Okay, so it is my theory, and I am now talking to you about a theory, that Fiore deals with cavazione in three instances. He mentions it, and he mentions it in a number of other places. He mentions the idea or the concept, not the name, but he deals with it in the longsword when he talks about the guards, which he refers to as deceptive. This is my theory. And most expressly in the Punta Falsa play. And in the Punta Falsa play, I believe he reveals to us his doctrine about when and how to cavazione. So using my wooden assistant, I'm just going to remind you of how the Punta Falsa play is supposed to look. And I would like to remind you that my assistant, due to COVID-19, can't move or be responsive, so I'm a little limited here. But let's say I start in really any good offline guard, and I throw a blow at my opponent. I snap a blow, and I force him to make a big parry. So he's made that cross. It's not really been a big parry. In fact, that wooden dowel didn't move very much, but let's all just roll with this. He's made a big parry, and now I'm going to pass my blade around his as I enter, and I'm going to cross and possibly take this bench right off. I'm going to cross, completely eliminating my opponent's ability to come back at me. I have closed that line, and now I'm going to pass down his blade for my strike. I think what Fiore is trying to tell us there is that it's very dangerous to deceive your opponent's blade and leave it on center line. And I appeal to all of you who have fenced rank beginners. Have you not had the experience of out-feinting a beginner and ending up only with a double? That's because when beginners lose your blade, they instantly strike. It's a sort of stage, not the earliest beginners, but middle beginners. And the moment they've lost control of your blade, they strike. I think Fiore knew that, and he didn't want that to happen to you. So I want to suggest that Fioreist doctrine on the cavazione should be, at the end of your cavazione, you must close the line and cross the blade. So instead of, I'm going to be offensive for a moment, instead of this motion, which allows me to simply pass under, deceive, and strike 1/22nd of a second ahead of my opponent, which will win me the Olympics, I need to strike and cross in such a way that that blade is never coming back at me. before I land my own blow. I was putting that in modern fencing because my opponent doesn't move around much and doesn't have a longsword. Okay, so now let's talk about some facts of the cavazione. So when you hold a longsword, there are a lot of different ways to hold a longsword. And again, I may be a little heretical. I change grips on my longsword all the time when I'm in free play. And changing grips means you have to have different ways to come to your cavazione. So I think the accepted universal approved grip, not quite a hammer, not quite a pistol, with my backhand on the pommel. And in that case, I would use my pommel, and this is why I don't like scent stopper pommels and I love wheels. I would use my hand on the pommel to turn this like a key in my hand so that when I make my deception, I can pass under the blade. My front hand did nothing. My backhand did all the work coming up so that I get exactly the blade edge alignment that I want as I move very slightly to close that line and make sure that I have seized the blade and glissade down it for my strike. So one more time, this is what I would call the standard. Here I am, say, in posta di donna. I have the standard grip with one finger slightly forward, and as my blade passes through the cross and threatens my opponent, I use my pommel to turn it very slightly under. My front fingers aren't doing any work, so that I have exactly the blade edge alignment I want to cross and power forward for my strike. And that's something you can easily practice at home. You could practice this on a doorknob, the way we used to practice for foil and épée in my youth, or you can set up one of these. It's just a dowel. You may not have a church bench with a hole in it, but I'll bet that somewhere in your house there's something, a door you can partly close. I've got a bungee cord holding this Rube Goldberg device together. I recommend that you set up something and make it flexible enough that you can hit it and not have it fall down. And ideally, this one, it's in a church, doesn't go up and down. But ideally, I would like it to be able to change its alignment so I can deal with different tactical situations, okay? Okay, so again, one more time. The standard grip. I throw my blow. As my blade passes into the deception zone, I turn with my backhand, cross the blade, and go for the hit. That would be cavazione 1. I want to talk a little bit about the zone. So I've made a mark on this, and I hope you can see this mark right here, because that's about the point on my opponent's blade where I start my cavazione. I know, it's an odd, everyone has their own marker, but I can't start my cavazione way out here because I'm not being deceptive. I have not thrown any threat on one side of the blade before I pass to the other. So I'm not deceiving my opponent at all. Likewise, in many Fiore illustrations in the Getty, the swords are crossed so deeply that it's too late for me to try a cavazione. I probably won't get my blade under and back online. In fact, in at least one situation, Fiore expressly tells you to go over. That's another class for another day. So I generally like to throw my cavazione from a long part of the long range. I like to use my height and arm length and throw from just the edge of my own range, because although it will take a longer fencing time to reach my opponent, I actually want her or him to see that thing coming and be deceived. So I actually want my blade to go well down, see my cross, see the mark. That's the moment I go under. Okay? So that's my zone. Somewhere between here and here is where I expect my point to reach before I start my cavazione and change sides of my opponent's blade. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so that was grip 1. Grip 2. I'm going to lay my thumb along my blade. This is a little Marazzo-esque, and I totally admit that we do not see this in Fiore. Some people affect to see it. I don't see it, but I do find it useful. I find it deceptive. I find it's very good for particular cuts and not so good for others. And I have a habit of switching from one grip to another grip, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth as I fence. and it gives me a different deception. So I will start in posta di donna again. Here I come with my cut, and now my thumb rolled my blade into my cavazione position. My thumb was the key, pushing down on the blade to roll it. And that allows me another great blade alignment and a really good alignment of my guard for the counter cut to my hand that sometimes just naturally comes out of that. So, second grip, thumb placed along the edge. I cut to my point, see the crossing, see the blade go under, and I play through. There are a number of other geometries that you have to end up in because of the guard you started in. And they're very different from our French foil guards out here, where our hand is always, always, always going to be in our favorite position on the blade. Often in longsword, we've completely changed our hand. See where I am now? Because I'm on the back side of my posta di donna sinistra. And now if I'm going to cavazione, I have to turn my wrist out hard and then turn my blade back. Huh? There are, quite frankly, almost as many hand positions as there are guards. And the left side hand positions, I find, are very slightly different from the right side. I recommend you practice them. So that's a whole realm of practice you can do in your apartment. You can do the practices from various guards, throwing a blow with a piece of wood, passing under, trying to catch that piece of wood coming back. You'll notice that I have a second piece of wood here, and it's not going to do very much for me. But the second piece of wood is actually to represent my opponent's blade movement in case I need to actually make a cavazione and my opponent is good enough to start coming back, right? So I wanted to show you how that worked. Final thing in this part of the exercise, just a little observation that I've made in the last year. This is the sword I usually use for free play in the saal. And this is the sword I usually use for playing in armor. I would never use this on friend or foe out of armor. It's stiff as a board and just a little bit dangerous. But I did notice that I make much better cavaziones with this blade. And the only theory I can offer you is that if you use too light a blade, it is possible that you're suffering from the same disease that marksmen suffer from when the barrel is too light and they're trying long-range shots. You need a little bit of weight to steady it down, because the standard error in a cavazione is usually that you overcompensate coming back, overslap your opponent's blade, or catch your opponent's blade, or catch your opponent's hilt. And those misses are all very tiny errors. It's possible that the heavier blade simply allows a more comfortable, see, even that just felt exact, a more comfortable resolution with less wobble in the point because it's heavier. And one of the things I've started to notice with students lately is that many students use blades that are too light because they feel faster off the shoulder or out of the guard. I'm beginning to suspect that a slightly heavier blade is actually better. Not so heavy that it's dangerous or it hurts your friends, but heavy enough that it is steady in your hand. Okay, I have a last piece to discuss in my COVID-19 in your apartment have a better cavazione, and that is I use a Nerf ball and a hardware store chain for my point control exercise. If I had an ideal apartment, I remind you that I'm in a church, I would try and hang my Nerf ball somewhere in this zone here so that I was practicing striking it at the end of my cavazione. But I don't have that today, so I've moved to a different part of my apartment, i.e. church, and I'm going to throw some cavaziones. I'm not, because I could embarrass myself and miss or leave a deep mark in the stone, which I suspect people would notice. But I'm going to make a few slow passes to demonstrate that this is an almost ideal, slightly random target, like your average human opponent, to make your cavazione and strike at the end of. And here's the reason. Point control is everything. If you can't hit at the end of your cavazione, you might as well not have thrown it at all. And as a matter of fact, I'll just demonstrate over here. If I were to throw a posta di donna cavazione, and I go passe, it's always bad for me. Even if I picked up the blade on the way in and then missed my blow, which I am well capable of doing, I am in as bad a position as my opponent, and now we're both going to reach for various things. We're at close play. Could be all bad, especially for an old man like me. So I really, really want to hit. So the way I learn to hit is to practice my cavaziones with my Nerf ball. And my Nerf ball allows me to know that I'm striking home at the end of my cavazione, and I hope you're seeing my cavazione action there. Little tiny V, down here deep in my opponent's zone, striking to the ball. And now I'm going to do it with my thumb on the blade. Oops, could be in a little trouble later. Didn't hit the ball that way. Thumb on the blade, high. And I can raise this all the way up to here, and one of the advantages to the thumb on the blade rotation is that if my opponent tends to parry high, an affectation you find often in HEMA, I can use this roll to go as high up as I want. My guard is crossed against a counter. This is going to be tricky going down into the ball. Not bad. Okay, so heavy blade, steady hands, 10,000 repetitions, making sure you're going all the way around, maybe a second stick to provide just a little bigger cone that you have to clear, and finally, point control against a target so that your cavazione actually goes home. Last thing I want to discuss, maybe should have been first, the easiest part. Fiore describes posta breve and posta longa as deceptive guards. And the truth is that I've had any number of students ask me, why is this deceptive? There it is. My arms are almost at full outreach. So I assume, and assumption is very dangerous, I assert that it's supposed to be deceptive because I can pass from side to side in these guards. And in passing from side to side, I'm deceptive. If you have other ideas, send me an email. But it is absolutely worth practicing very simple, straightforward hits. From posta breve, making your deception maybe with an offline pass, maybe an offline pass that keeps you alive and allows you to close that line. That way, see my hilt turn sideways so that the counter cut's going into my guard, see me stepping offline, see me hitting the Nerf ball. All part of your cavazione. So, that was your in your apartment COVID-19 cavazione drill from the IAS. I'm Chris Cameron of Hopologia. I hope you enjoyed yourself.